Hey guys, 14.3, the end of the Cold War. It just started, right? But it's heating up now, global warming. So, let's go ahead and get into it. I'm not wasting time today. It is evening, and it is a pretty day outside, I think. Nope, there's a storm, so never mind. Anyway, problems in the USSR. There's a lot of them in the 1980s. Cost of maintaining your military. Few chances. Let me get my pen out here. I say that every time. Few chances to experience freedom and democracy, but here's the biggie. Okay, the lack of economic incentives with communism. Knowing that if the government is going to employ what is called central planning, then any surplus you make is going to go to the government so they can redistribute. Who knows what that says? So instead of taking your surplus and then saying, you know what, I'm going to take my surplus that I make and I'm going to sell it for more cash, I'm going to sell it for cash, then invest, I'm going to just store it, keep my stuff for next year. In a Soviet-style central planning government, the government really decides what to take and then who to take it back to, and then what also perhaps you are making. So there are no individual incentives or individual decisions, which leads to a lack of individual incentives. So there are big problems, but don't worry, the man to fix it is Mikhail Gorbachev. Okay, and he has two reforms in which he's going to try to implement to fix the Soviet Union's problems. The first one is called perestroika, which is a word meaning restructuring, in which he wants to infuse communism and revitalize it with capitalist measures, giving more individual incentives into the economy so that people will be individually motivated to work harder and support your government. This is very much like what Vladimir Lenin did with the NEP back in the day in the 1920s. The second reform is called glasnost, and the point of this is, the word glasnost is Russian for transparency. And the thought here is that you're going to now let the Soviet Union and your satellite states have more political free speech and have more political liberty, meaning that you're going to allow more political parties. The thought being that if you loosen the belts a little bit, people will get a little bit more relaxed. You can talk a little bit more about the problems that are there without being having fear of censorship or things like that. And the idea is that hopefully you let people get a little bit more comfortable in this Soviet-style, communist, central planning style of society. It didn't help Gorbachev in his quest to reform the USSR that was getting a lot of attention from the West. You have two leaders, one in America, one in Great Britain, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, who were very tough toward the Soviet Union, and both will increase their military spending and military rhetoric during their administrations in the 1980s. And the thought being that the more that the U.S. and the Great Britain and NATO and those Western allies spend on defense spending, the Soviet Union will not be able to match that spending because they have to put so much attention into central planning of consumer goods. So let's take a look here. We got Margaret Thatcher, we got Ronald Reagan. Again, high on military spending. They want to outspend the USSR on military matters. That is not going to be a problem to do that. And the point is, if they amp up their spending, the Soviet Union feels like they need to amp it up so they can remain competitive in a geopolitical rivalry. And that's going to be trouble because the economic issues become more acute and aggravated for the Soviet Union. So one example of Reagan doing that, for instance, was his decision to release plans for this thing called Star Wars, which of course you're aware of the movie and my cool lightsaber that I use in class sometimes. But the thought was that the United States would build satellites that would act as a missile defense system so that when a nuclear missile perhaps was launched toward another country, the United States could shoot lasers down. And here's the laser damage. There it is. Look at the lasers. Lasers everywhere. So many lasers. Okay. So the thought was you could shoot down all of the lasers, or shoot the lasers and fire and take out, boom, there it goes, take down the missiles as they were fired. Now this program was never implemented, but what it does is it amps up the rhetoric, it amps up the decision making for the Soviet Union, where they feel like they have to put more in defense spending as well, and that's less than they did on consumer spending. So all of these tensions and all these cracks are going to finally fissure in 1989, in which Glasnost for Gorbachev allows for more political liberties. It allows for more political groups to kind of make their case known, and that leads to Eastern European countries declaring independence from communism one by one, in which they have an election and other political parties are put into power. And the Soviet Union, where in the past they would send in the tanks, now they are not. And you have, starting with Poland, a country which is saying we don't want to be ruled by the communists anymore. And that will continue in Germany with the fall of the Berlin Wall. That will continue in Czechoslovakia. That will continue in Yugoslavia and Hungary and Romania, in which the communist parties are jettisoned. They are kicked out, and new, free, democratic societies will be established in 1989. And this leaves the Soviet Union very much unguarded, very much isolated, because now their satellite states are no longer satellite states. They are, in essence, free to pursue policies that they want. The Iron Curtain is now falling back. And that leads 2 years later to the Soviet Union dissolving into 15 independent republics, including Russia. The Soviet Union is no more by Christmas Day in 1991, and America is judged to have won the Cold War. And an interesting cartoon to kind of show you the disillusion of communism, how Lenin, Marx, and Stalin are watching Gorbachev lead communism to its death with the reforms he put in and his unwillingness and inability to keep the Soviet Union together by 1991. Again, 1991 is the year in which the Soviet Union falls. And this kind of shows you kind of the pattern here. You got the Soviet Union here as it was, but now will be divided into 15 republics. Really, most notably will be, of course, Russia. Pen has gone away. Oh well. Now, you could also, going back to this real quick, is the role that nationalism plays here, right? Where's my pen? I feel like when I went laser, I lost my ability to use the pen. This is not good. I hope I didn't break my screen. Okay. My pen. I'm very sad. Okay. But anyway, new waves of nationalism in Eastern and Central Europe, because look at all these new countries, right, that have ethnic differences, and they're like, whoo, yay, we get to kind of control our own show. So, why did the Soviet Union fall? We'll go back to the cracks, right, that we looked at in the 1980s, particularly the economic incentives. These are kind of more fleshed out. You have a war in Afghanistan, we mentioned in 14.2. That is a financial drain. The nationalist resentment from other countries, very much a, Napoleon is kind of in our place. Hitler is in our place when we rebel against them. Economic struggles in the 70s, the middle class becoming too influential, wanting to have the perestroika, cost of protecting empire. So all of this is economic and political, which eventually dooms the Soviet Union. Now the question is it back, right? I mean, Vladimir Putin is certainly a strong presence. And as time has gone on, Russia in the 1990s in particular had a hard time shifting to a capitalist and democratic country. Lots of corruption up top, lots of inability to find the balance in how democracy will work in a country that has really never seen it. So Vladimir Putin has come to power and has slowly but surely decreased personal freedoms and liberties in Russia. I just saw this weekend, actually, a protest which going on in Russia about his recent election and how that election in which he was victorious, may not have been the most fair or transparent thing in the world. So there's still the right to protest, but the right to a fair election, we don't know if that's the case. And you can see there are things happening that are showing that the Cold War is coming back potentially, in which Russia and the United States are not fighting per se, but certainly on opposite sides of geopolitical issues around the world. So with that in mind, I believe 14.3. I don't really want to keep that. Goodbye. So yeah, that's it. That's the end of the Cold War. Is it coming back? Yeah, maybe, kind of. Certainly under a different name. But from this section, make sure to remember especially those reforms of Gorbachev's and how those led to the revolutions of 1989. See ya.